fringe elements of the conservative establishment speaking outrageously against Jews in Israel, inciting, provoking, seeding the ground for a hoped-for harvest of anti-Jewish revolt in the Republican and conservative movements. This fringe has a very loud and persuasive microphone. At the front of that movement is the once respected Tucker Carlson.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, this is Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and human rights author of 325 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and my latest scoop book, Israel Strikes Iran, as well as a bold new 15th anniversary edition of Nazi Nexus just releasing. Ours is a show for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. Subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support and keep us independent. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by members of the Jewish communities of Eastern Ohio and Salt Lake City, and co-sponsored by my bold new 15th anniversary edition of Nazi Nexus, available everywhere across the planet in 12 paperback, hardback, electronic, and audiobook editions. That said, remember, I only speak for myself, and the same goes for my guests. Today, we welcome viewers from across America, including our 4 watch parties again in the Villages, Newton, Mass., Chicago, and Tampa Bay. Hi, Harvey. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from most of our usuals: Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, Canada, Germany, France, Poland, Hungary, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, our big one in Panama, as well as Israel, plus other countries. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, speaks frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a turbulent future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We'll get to our compelling main topic, anti-Semitism infecting the conservative movement, in about 10 minutes. But first, a few items of interest in our burning world. Strangely enough, while anti-Semitism soars worldwide, there are still great films in the pipeline that remind us of where Jewish hatred leads. One such film is Bau Artists at War, which retells the impossible but true story of a romance at the monstrous Plaszow concentration camp at Krakow that was featured in Steven Spielberg's monumental Schindler's List. It's the same place. It was awful. Among the God-granted survivor stories is that of the artist and humorist Joseph Bau, who defied the monsters to survive, marry camp inmate Rebecca Tenenbaum, and eventually become Israel's greatest Mossad document forger. These films are driven by singular individuals who care compassionately. With us today, we have one of the main men behind the project, my longtime friend, Richard Allen. Richard, take the camera and tell us how you discovered this extraordinary story.
Hello. Well, what we have here is it's really a beautiful story. I found out about it about 20 years ago, about Joseph and Rebecca Bau. They had a love story in the camps. And I have to tell you, I have one of my main rabbis in New York. I was speaking to him years ago about this story, and I told him that we're looking to make a film on it. And he said, Richie, there's no love story in the camps. It's just not possible. Yet it's true. It's not possible, but it happened. And what we have is that Joseph and Rebecca Bau. Joseph was the forger for Schindler, and it's famous in the Schindler's List. And his wife, Rebecca, well, his soon-to-be wife, Rebecca, was the manicurist that gave manicure to Amon Goth, the commandant. And you saw that in the film where he puts the gun down on the table and says, if you cut me, you're dead. And every day was a day that they could possibly be killed. Yet through their love and their ability to help out, they saved Jews. And the movie was written by Deborah Smersnik. She's going to be speaking in a few minutes. And she's the producer as well. And she has an incredible story. Besides that, this movie has Inbar Levy, who's the actress who plays Rebecca Bau. She's, you probably remember her. She was in Fauda. She was in Lucifer. She played Eve. And then also Emil Hirsch plays Joseph Bau, B-A-U. He got famous for Into the Wild with Sean Penn. But these are two terrific, very young actors, and they play it really well with incredible critical acclaim. But Deborah, this is really interesting. Deborah met the Bau sisters.
Richard, thank you. We're going to take Richard's time and give it to Deborah. Deborah, thank you very much for joining us. You are the scriptwriter and one of the producers.
No, I'm the executive producer. I funded this. I bought the rights. This was me going to the Daughters Museum in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
And hearing their parents' story and being so impressed. And I am not Jewish. So I want you all to know that I was so overcome by their ability to overcome oppression, depression, evil, torture, and override all that took place. That I said to the daughters, I said, this has to be made into a movie. And they said they've been praying for that. And that's when I said, okay, I've never done a movie, never written a script, but I'm going to do all I can to see this take place. And not that I'm trying to give myself credit, but I'll tell you, when you see these kinds of stories, you cannot help but be moved in the fact that this will help millions of people overcome what they're dealing with. I had a husband who had Alzheimer's. I helped take care of him for 8 years in my home. It was so incredible. And every time I thought I couldn't handle it, I would think back on Joseph and Rebecca Bau and go, if they can do it, and with, God's help, you get through these things. And that's why I so badly want to inspire people to watch it, because it really shows that the heart of these people to sacrifice their lives for one another and to do it at the risk, of their own life, constantly helping and giving. They both sacrificed. They saved close to 1,000 people out of the camps. And it's so inspiring. So,
Deborah, where is this film in the Oscar activity? I understand you're on the short list to be nominated.
Well, we're not necessarily. Today, we actually find out if we're on the short list. So we were part of the 201 movies that have actually done the application process, paid the money to get into the academies. Then they decide today which movies will be on the short list. And we haven't been notified yet. So.
Okay, and full disclosure, Deborah says that her husband had Alzheimer's, and I should tell you that the producers and crew of this film, their next movie is on Alzheimer's, and they were in my house this Monday doing extensive interviews with me about the famous Dr. Oscar Fischer, who was murdered in a Gestapo camp. And that's all I'll say, because I don't want to reveal too much. Deborah, thank you very much for a great piece of work. Richard, thank you for being involved, and stick around if you can. So, ladies and gentlemen, item 2, of course, is Trump, Greenland, Davos, and the Board of Peace. Greenland is in North America, just 16 miles from Canada at the Davis Strait, and one Greenland offshore island actually shares a fence, a land border with Canada. No one really knows why Denmark owns it, except the bizarre story of Viking Eric the Red, you've seen the movies, fleeing to the mostly empty island from Iceland to avoid a murder charge. And then once he got there, he made himself the head guy over small groups of Inuit Indians. In later generations, Denmark tried to find Norsemen, but they could not. So they figured they would claim the entire landmass as Danish. Many U.S. presidents have tried to purchase Greenland due to its strategic importance as an Arctic outpost. In about 1867, President Johnson authorized his Secretary of State, William Seward, to offer the Russians $7.2 million in gold for Alaska. That's about $132 million in today's money. And also an effort to buy Greenland from Denmark. Denmark reportedly was ready to sell for $5.5 million, but Congress would not support the deal. We did get Alaska, but we did not get Greenland. We came close again in 1902 and 1916. During World War II, America operated at least 14, not one, but 14 military bases there to help fight the Nazis. After the war, Harry Truman offered $100 million, but Denmark at this time said no. But we were granted military rights. On January 21st, 1968, the U.S. Air Force accidentally dropped 4 thermonuclear bombs in a B-52 crash. Sorry about that. One of those critically and deadly bomb components we still cannot find. It's still there. We can't recover it. Today, with the Arctic Sea opening up due to climate change and with the advent of mass missile and drone threats, including hypersonic missiles, we see that the main missile routes from Russia essentially come over the polar caps and Greenland. So if we are to build a golden dome, it needs to be on Greenland due to the Earth's polar curvature. In addition, Greenland possesses massive deposits of critical and rare earth minerals. Only 2 mining operations exist at the south. That's Kwanfeld, controlled by China's Shenghe Resources, and Shenghe recently tried to purchase control of the other operation known as Tambreez. Only intense State Department lobbying blocked Denmark from selling off the second operation to the Chinese. So Trump and many strategic analysts say we finally need to finalize the acquisition of Greenland, now owned for some reason by Denmark. Trump made his most audacious offer yesterday at the World Economic Forum at Davos, Switzerland. Now, we would understand if, while watching, you thought you were actually seeing The Godfather Part 4. Trump laid out in a stunning offer that they could not refuse. Quote, so they have a choice. You can say yes, and we'll be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember. That's a close quote.
They have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
Many thought that Trump had no right to be so abrasive to the genteel, polished EU. How dare he offend them? How dare he offend Denmark? True, the Vikings wielded amongst the most brutal of barbarian armies, enslaving many thousands of East Europeans and Africans. They called their slaves thralls, and the females were often decapitated when they became unwanted. How dare Trump insult Belgium, gentle Belgium, which from 1885 to 1908 became fabulously rich after the Belgian king enslaved innocent Congo natives to harvest rubber. If the cruelly treated men, women, and children didn't make their quotas, their hands and feet were cut off, and not infrequently, they were boiled in pots for cannibals to eat. Yes, corporate mandated cannibalism. That's Belgium. How dare Trump insult France? Exquisite France, with its exquisite Eiffel Tower, financed by the CIC Bank, based on the extortionate financing and rape of the impoverished Haiti economy, this as punishment for the slaves declaring their freedom. Yes, France, Germany's fascist partner in World War II, France, the brutal overlord in North African colonies, including Algeria, where from 1954 to 1962, close to 1 million Algerians were killed. I could go on, but you get the idea. Mostly, Trump had the nerve, the gall, to talk bluntly in civilized Switzerland, very civilized. Switzerland was the financial fulcrum for Nazi Germany. Swiss banks looted $4 billion in Jewish assets and smelted hundreds of thousands of gold teeth from Auschwitz into monetary money. I have one report speaking of 40,000 Jewish teeth being processed. Here's one right here, Geheim. Yes, 48 dentists were prosecuted for war crimes after the Holocaust. Now, that was during the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, Swiss banks money laundered Nazi money for the escaped officials of the Third Reich. So, Mr. Trump, don't talk brutishly to the genteel Swiss. Remember, they make fine Swiss chocolate. I guess some of that chocolate is actually bittersweet. The Greenland saga is yet to play out, and I'll have more to say about the EU and NATO in my next episode. This leads to today's focal point: anti-Semitism infecting the conservative movement. The Jewish community has been blessed to have a Moshe Dayan in the White House, Donald J. Trump, a tough and decisive leader who delivers, a man who has proven day in and day out that he cherishes Israel rhetoric, persecution, political agitation, economic warfare, and violence across the nation, across this continent, across the English-speaking world, and indeed circumnavigating the planet. Trump comes through every day in every way, from his litigating Justice Department to his diplomatic support to his military muscle. And it's not just President Trump. He speaks for a conservative and Republican movement that is solidly, vociferously, and genuinely on the side of the Jewish people as a cherished progenitor of Western civilization's Judeo-Christian ethic, and this extends to Israel, which is valued by this administration as a powerful and ethical ally. What a contrast. Biden blackmailed Israel after October 7 not to take action. That's when Bibi Netanyahu announced, quote, "You'll remember this, if necessary, we will fight them with our fingernails," close quote. Trump has supported Israel every hour with diplomatic courage, from sanctioning the ICC prosecutors to military muscle, as well as massively resupplying Israel, bombing Iran, and securing the release of all living hostages from Gaza. And Trump also speaks for a bold and authentic and multi-generational religious community. I'm not just talking about the 10 to 11 million members of Christians United for Israel, led by Pastor Hagee, and the voices that Ambassador Mike Huckabee represents, but rank and file Christians from the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches. In fact, I will shortly be lecturing on Israel's history by special invitation at the Franciscan Catholic University in Steubenville. In political thought, all the Republican think tanks, or most of them, the scores of legislators that stand with Jews, or most of them, against anti-Semitism, they also stand with Israel against genocide. The true blue and white support is there. You want a number? I can't give you one. You want me to guess? I'll say 99%. And yet, we see fringe elements of the conservative establishment speaking outrageously against Jews in Israel, inciting, provoking, seeding the ground for a hoped-for harvest of anti-Jewish revolt in the Republican and conservative movements. It's only being whispered about now. It's not yet really happening. But we know that anti-Semitism and anti-Israel agitation has actually hijacked the overwhelming ranks of the Democratic Party. Complete reversal from the Democratic Party that I grew up with, but we did not expect this to occur in the conservative movement at the fringe. But this fringe has a very loud and persuasive microphone. At the front of that movement is the once respected Tucker Carlson, who has made common cause with Qatar, the most insidious of national adversaries, which has purchased influence throughout American society, from our college campuses to our media to our influencers. In fact, in many quarters, Tucker is now derisively referred to as Tucker Carlson. Let's look at some of his outrageous language. I'm quoting here, folks. Netanyahu is the enemy of Western civilization, close quote. Quote, I think white people are the main victims of discrimination in the United States, not Jews. Here's another one. Pro-Israel supporters believe, quote, their people, whoever they're defending, are specially chosen by God and that others are subhuman, close quote. And then he says, Israel is a completely insignificant country, close quote. Tucker is not alone. Berserk influencer Candace Owens has used her videos to target and castigate Jews and Israel. Here's a few samples. A very small ring of specific people who are using the fact that they are Jewish will shield themselves from any criticism, close quote. On Israel itself, no government anywhere has the right to commit a genocide ever. There is no justification for a genocide. This on the continuing false claim and blood libel that Israel is committing a genocide, which it is not. And Candace suggested the arrest of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro was actually a Zionist undertaking. Listen to the words of just withdrawn U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. We know because she insisted that California wildfires were, quote, caused by Jewish space lasers. I thought we'd covered that up, but she found out. We laughed that one off, but she also recently stated, quote, an unholy alliance of leftists, capitalists, and Zionist supremacists has schemed, the deliberate aim of breeding us out of existence. I repeat this Hitler-esque statement. Quote, the deliberate aim of breeding us out of existence, period, close quote. There are several others, more than just injecting their venom into the conservative conversation, and Tucker has millions of listeners. They have consciously elevated actual Hitler-loving anti-Semites into that dialogue. For example, neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, who stated, quote, sit down, folks. My problem with Trump isn't that he's Hitler. My problem with Trump is that he's not Hitler, close quote. Trump has already stated openly that these voices are not part of the MAGA movement, and he does not want their support. But what about after Trump? What about J.D. Vance? I will say it out loud. Jews are worried that Vance may be influenced by Tucker, who still has continuing access to the White House. His son, Buckley Carlson, has been hired as Vance's deputy press secretary. When people criticized that, Vance lost it. Late last year, Vance exploded publicly and blurted out, and yes, everyone who I've seen attack Buckley with lies is a scumbag, close quote. J.D. Vance, look at me. Am I a scumbag? Are my panelists scumbags? The esteemed National Review just yesterday headlined a major essay, quote, Vance will have to choose between Tucker and the presidency, close quote. And the subhead cautioned, quote, sooner or later the ambitious vice president will need to decide which he values more, close quote. Tucker and his ilk must be removed from White House circles. Go ahead, Tucker, invite me on to ask me why and see if you can last 5 minutes. I will answer if I get there. As the judges of all war crime tribunals have stated, you may find instructive the verdict against Stryker, who published the Stürmer. The judges and the framers of the genocide laws held that it was impossible for so many to participate in destroying the Jews without the mass public poisoning of their minds. The judicial verdict against Stryker asserts, quote, in his speeches and articles, week after week, month after month, he infected the German mind with the virus of anti-Semitism and incited the German people to active persecution, close quote. The 1971 Bangladesh War International Crimes Tribunal found Ghulam Azam of the terrorist group Jamaat-e-Islami guilty of 28 counts of inciting genocide for public denunciation of Hindus and Bengalis as, quote, enemies of Islam. In Rwanda, numerous media figures were prosecuted by using euphemisms such as cockroach to describe Tutsis. Violence is escalating against Jews. Court verdict after court verdict agrees there can be no mass acceptance of violence without the pre-poisoning of the public's mind. My advice to you, Tucker, get some knowledge before you open your mouth next. And if you think you can face me down, I'm only an Uber away. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I could talk about this infection at the margins all day, but as usual, I had to leave out 99%. However, I passed the microphone to one of the Jewish community's most influential and thoughtful voices in the Jewish community's #1 news source, which everyone should be reading every day as I do. I speak of the Jewish News Syndicate, found at jns.org. I give you JNS Editor-in-Chief Jonathan Tobin, who has recently written a key essay on this very subject. Take the camera, Jonathan.
Thanks, Edwin. It's great to be with you. I have to say I loved your segment about Greenland and Trump. I wrote about it this week as well. As for what's been going on the right, this is very troubling. I think many supporters of Israel had rightly come to the conclusion in recent years that the real problem was on the left. And they were right about that. The Democratic Party, the base of the Democratic Party, has been taken over by the so-called progressives who have bought into the toxic myths of critical race theory, intersectionality, and settler colonialism that brands Jews and Israel as white oppressors. Antisemitism on the left has become normative. It's illustrated by the election of Zohran Mamdani, by the story about Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. When he was vetted by Kamala Harris, he was asked if he was an Israeli double agent and if he would apologize for condemning anti-Semitism. But the problem isn't only on the left. What we've seen in the last year is the way Tucker Carlson, as you eloquently put it, Edwin, he has become the tribune of anti-Semitism in the United States at this time. He has a lot of credit left over from his time on Fox News, when you could well say he was the tribune of conservatism during the Black Lives Matter summer of 2020. That earned him a lot of credit with mainstream conservatives. But once he was tossed off of Fox News and began his own program, the guardrails and the filters were off. This is something I've been covering and following, actually, even when he was on Fox News. It was clear he had a problem with Israel and had a problem about anti-Semitism, but it's now abundantly clear. Now that's all he talks about is Israel. Israel was something he never talked about on Fox News. Now it's all he talks about. He'll platform anybody who will condemn Israel. More to the point, he has platformed Holocaust denial. And as he said, neo-Nazis like Nick Fuentes. So the question is, what does the rest of the conservative movement think about it? And the answer, unfortunately, is that conservatives have been divided. The head of the Heritage Foundation, which has been doing exemplary work fighting against anti-Semitism, came out and endorsed Tucker and defended him against his critics. But more importantly, and as well as other podcasters like Megyn Kelly also took sides with him, and they're claiming the issue is cancel culture and that the supporters of Israel want to shut up people. That's not true. There's nobody can be canceled or shut up in today's environment. But the truth is, it's a question of what we are willing to tolerate. And the answer from Vice President J.D. Vance, who spoke at the Turning Point USA conference in December, and he deliberately chose to say that he was neutral between, say, Ben Shapiro, who had condemned Tucker, and Tucker. Tucker, he owes Tucker. Tucker helped him get elected to the Senate. Tucker helped him be picked, along with his friend Donald Trump Jr., be picked as vice president. And Vance has made it abundantly clear he will not give up Tucker Carlson. And he's also claiming that this is about whether people don't like Israel. Well, of course, it's not about liking Israel or not liking Israel. It's about opposing the existence of Israel, and it's about condoning anti-Semitism. And if, as it appears right now, and we're more than 2 years away from the 2028 race, but Vance has a big leg up to succeed President Trump, who, as you rightly said, has been an exemplary friend of Israel and the Jewish people, doing more to fight anti-Semitism than any of his predecessors. But Vance appears to be not on the same page when it comes to these important issues. I think he's great in many other ways. I've applauded some of his other stands. But Vance is right now a big question mark about anti-Semitism, about support for Israel. And we're going to have to see whether he wants the presidency enough to distance himself from Tucker, or whether he believes, as may well be right now, that the Groyper vote is so influential among conservatives and among Republicans. And there are people who say that among, young conservatives working in Washington right now, that more than 40% of them listen to Nick Fuentes. So this is the problem on the right. We have a huge problem of anti-Semitism. It's pervasive on the left, but we can no longer ignore the fact that we also have a problem on the right.
Jonathan, that was a stunning and incisive insight into a problem that we want to remain on the margins, but is obviously trying to grow every day like an infection. But I want to ask you straight up, does Marco have a chance?
Well, if he's not going to run, he doesn't have a chance. And he's already signaled that he does not wish to run against J.D. Vance. Now, of course, in 2 years, a lot can change. But the two of them have been working very closely together in the White House. Rubio is the most powerful man in American foreign policy since Henry Kissinger, being both the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. He's someone who is certainly a friend of the Jewish community, a friend of Israel, an opponent of anti-Semitism. But he's the only one, I would say right now. I know Ted Cruz is planning to run. He's a great friend of Israel, a great friend of the Jewish people, a wonderful senator, but I wouldn't give him too much of a chance of beating Vance right now. Vance is a formidable figure. He's a true intellectual. He's not just another Washington politician. He is an intellectual. He's a smart guy. He's an excellent communicator, and he's great on a lot of issues. In fact, he's able to articulate and intellectualize some of the positions that Trump kind of just blusters about. So right now he has a leg up on the Republican nomination, but it's a long time. So many things can happen between now and then, but that's the real question right now. And as far as Rubio, if he does run, he could be a good candidate. But remember, he did run for president once before and it didn't go well. So, running for president is not like running for anything else. And at that, in 2016, he was not ready for prime time. Will he be ready for it in 2028? Will he want to challenge J.D. Vance? Those are questions that have yet to be answered.
Wow. Thank you very much, Jonathan. These are great insights. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, one of this country's apex Jewish rights attorneys, the esteemed Alyza Lewin, who will weigh in from a communal perspective. She has been studying this topic. Alyza, take it away.
Hi there, Edwin. Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be here and always a delight to also hear Jonathan and his always just such astute, perceptive analysis of these issues, both of you. So I think it's absolutely correct. I mean, what we're seeing now happening on the right is the mirror reflection of what happened on the left. Both extremes are using the same excuse, if you want to say, or masquerading behind the claim that all they really want to do is engage in this public debate, in this criticism of Israel, and they are being silenced. They are being shut down. That is not true. Nobody's speech is being silenced. No one is being shut down, as you can see, right? They still have the megaphone that they have, but that's what they claim. That's what the left wing claimed also, is that this was all about speech. And you also see that what they're playing towards is a community that's following them that feels totally disaffected and that feels lost and is, not at the moment feels that whether it's economics or other societal issues have just, passed them by. They're not benefiting today from society. And whenever you have a disaffected community, it automatically, I think, immediately looks for someone to blame. And what history has shown is that the Jew is always the scapegoat. That's the way that the anti-Semitism starts, right? The Jew is to blame. Doesn't matter the era, doesn't matter the century, doesn't matter what the actual allegation is. You can have 180-degree diametrically opposed allegations because at its core, the anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. That's how you have the people accusing the Jews of being both the communists and the capitalists. And that's why why you can see, once again, like that horseshoe theory, whether it's from the extreme right, whether it's from the extreme left, they both will agree that the Jews are to blame. I remember being at a conference at one point, and there was an organization that helps parents whose children have been radicalized. And they had there speaking both someone who had once been a extreme radical Islamic fundamentalist and somebody who'd been a neo-Nazi and now were working with this organization. And I'll never forget when the neo-Nazi said, when I was a Nazi, it was so easy. He said, anything that went wrong in my life, I had a problem with my girlfriend, it was the Jew's fault. It was much easier to blame the Jew than to have to look inside myself to figure out what I might have done wrong in terms of needing to address that relationship. And that's, quite frankly, again, why anti-Semitism is so dangerous to our democracy, because nobody's going to solve the problems in society by blaming the Jews, because it has nothing to do with the Jews to begin with. And that's what you're seeing happen. So that's, I think, kind of the main initial issue, is that you've got these folks who are actually blaming the Jews. They're blaming our Jewish homeland, Israel as the Jewish collective. It's the one that's, leading America astray, that's draining our economy, that's pulling us into wars, whatever it is, it's those Jews to blame. And you have a society that's looking for someone to blame. I will say, though, that at the same time, I do think that our community has to think about the subtle shift that is taking place in the messaging of the Conservative Party, and how to address that subtle shift, right? So we are seeing a shift in the conservative messaging, right? If you saw, for instance, Howard Lutnick at Davos talking about the concept of nations, and nations should be able to advance their own interests, and yet nations can advance their own interests and have allies. That's a framing, right, that actually could be used and should be used by those who want to be able to say, yes, Israel, for example, and America are both nations that should be able to act independently in their own interests. And at the same time, we should recognize that America's greatest ally in that region is Israel. There is no better ally for America than Israel. And to be right, the Israelis can also recognize that America is its great ally. But there's a subtle shift, the shift that we have thought in the past and that we've used, where we've talked about how America and Israel have common values, the Judeo-Christian values. We have common enemies, and we're fighting the same war against those common enemies. That language is no longer resonating across the conservative movement. And I think that the Jewish community needs to understand that, needs to recognize that, and needs to start adjusting the way we talk about the issues similarly, to make sure that we don't lose parts of the conservative movement to the anti-Semitic Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens wing.
Alyza, that was stunning, but my question to you is, what do we do after we think about it?
We use it. We come up with this, right? We understand, we dig in and we delve into trying to understand this new framing and the new thinking in the conservative movement. And then we talk about it that way. I mean, it takes effort. It takes, understanding what are the concerns. How does the conservative movement see the issues that it is concerned about from an American perspective, and then explain and address why for each of those issues our framing, right, our position is in America's best interest.
Well, who do you think is going to prevail in that debate? Is it going to be us and the minds of reason, or is it going to be the bad thinkers?
Well, we have to make sure it's us. I don't want to think about what happens if it's the bad thinkers. We have to prevail.
All right. Good to see you, Alyza. And we are loaded with questions. We have a little time for that because I've kept everybody to the clock, including Alyza. And the first one is from Mike in Dallas. And Mike is a Christian, I can tell you. He says, how can you have neutrality on anti-Semitism? I'm giving that to Jonathan because I think Jonathan spoke about that. Open your mic and respond. How can anyone have, in politics, in leadership, be neutral on anti-Semitism?
Well, I think the easy, quick answer is no, you can't be neutral about anti-Semitism. And that's why J.D. Vance's speech at Turning Point USA was so troubling. The trouble is that, people will, even anti-Semites will at times say that they're against anti-Semitism. Zoran Mamdani is, saying, well, I'm against anti-Semitism. Tucker Carlson says, I'm not an anti-Semite. Both of them, like Jews who hate Israel and who will turn on the rest of the Jewish community. The question is basically, how are we defining anti-Semitism? That's why they oppose the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, working definition, because it says, listen, if you're wishing to deprive Jews of rights that you would not deny to anyone else, such as the right to live in peace and in security in their own homeland, if you're calling Jews Nazis, that's anti-Semitism. Yet, people will dispute that. They want, the anti-Semites want a very loose, a very restricted definition of anti-Semitism, so allow them to continue being anti-Semitic without actually having to own it. And again, when people like Vance, say, well, I'm against anti-Semitism, but still are buddies with Tucker Carlson and won't condemn, or like Megyn Kelly saying, well, don't make me say something I don't want to say because I'm a big girl. That's not good enough. If you're against anti-Semitism, then condemn the anti-Semites. Speak up against them. Don't be neutral about them. That's not a moral stance. It's not a politically viable stance either. And it's a betrayal. I mean, one of the most insidious elements of Carlson's rant against the Jews is that he's basically against the whole idea of a Judeo-Christian heritage. He thinks, Israel and the Jews have nothing to do with the West. He wants to brand Jews and Israel as aliens.
He's actually said those very words. You're very correct. So I want to ask you straight up, are you worried or are you not worried?
Well, that's like the old joke about what's a Jewish telegram. I mean, not that most people know what a telegram is anymore, but for those who only have heard of a telegram on old movies, it's like a text that's printed out on a piece of paper and delivered. And the old Jewish joke was, what does a Jewish telegram say? Start worrying. Details to follow. And so, of course, I'm worried. We're supposed to be worried, but we're also supposed to fight. Your question to Alyza, what do we do? What if we don't win? Well, you know what? We keep fighting. We speak up. We do it smartly. We adapt. She's absolutely, Alyza Lewin is absolutely right. We have to speak in the language that conservatives now understand and not as if it was 30 years ago. Speak of, an America First policy. And Vance, quite frankly, gave a speech a year ago or a year and a half ago about how Israel was the perfect America First ally because it stands up for itself. It doesn't ask America to fight for it. We need to remind him of that. We need to remind other conservatives of that the aid that Israel gets is actually all spent in the United States. So,
that's right, about 80% of it is spent in...
Right, it's an aid program to U.S. arms industries and their employees. So, yeah, we have to fight. We have to not take this lying down. And you know what? Within the DNA, Jews, I could give you many examples, and it's often more on the left. Jews have sort of, there are a lot of Jews with trembling knees, as Menachem Begin would say, who are afraid to fight, who are afraid to speak up, who are, and frankly, many in our leadership of the Jewish community and our established organizations are guilty of that. And it's time for them to fight.
Well, they need a knee brace. Thank you, Jonathan. Hey, Richard.
Just add something. I want to add something about the neutrality question, if I can, for a minute. When I used to get asked this a lot from university administrators, right? University administrators wanted to have this neutrality policy. And the big problem with that is that they are conflating, right? What is a legitimate political debate about what's going on in the Middle East? And that's where they feel they want to be neutral. They don't want to pick a side. They don't want to, right? They want to be neutral. And they are refusing to recognize that what is happening in front of them is not a good faith political debate. This is not actually about what's going on in the Middle East. This is not about Israel's policies. This is about the vilification, the dehumanizing, the delegitimizing of Jews, the Jewish people, and Israel, our Jewish homeland, as the Jewish collective. And what the administrators and what society and what our political leaders like Mamdani and the others have to realize is I don't really care what most of them think, quite frankly, certainly not university administrators, about the policies, about the politics, right? I don't want them to issue those statements. We all know what they would say. They would say that everybody should be entitled to live their full potential and have, peace and prosperity. What I do want them to call out is to call out and to condemn when the Jews are being targeted on the basis of their Jewishness. And they're not doing that because they're hiding behind this masquerade saying, oh, this is a political debate and I can't choose a side. It's not a debate and you're not choosing a side. But by being silent, you are failing to call out and protect the civil and human rights of the Jewish people. Over and over and over again, that's what we're seeing. So this neutrality is just, it's a deceit. There's nothing to be neutral about. And folks are using it as a crutch and an excuse to avoid actually condemning the anti-Semitism that's taking place.
That's right. It's the doormat to the worst path. I'm going to ask Richard a question. Richard, before you got tied up with this movie stuff as a producer, you were in the forefront of the day-to-day fight against anti-Semitism in New York. And you did a wonderful job and you were quite courageous. I want to ask you in one word, are you worried?
Yes, I am worried. When I was, a few years back, we were going against the UJA Federation and some of the JCCs and other Jewish organizations that were helping out groups that were supporting BDS, and they were doing it secretly. Believe it or not, the UJA Federation funded very anti-Israel films. One of the film companies was called Just Visions, and they funded them with seed money, and they've made the most vile anti-Israel films. Well, now I'm not so worried about the people within these organizations because people know what BDS means. At those days, people didn't know what BDS was, the boycott, divestiture, and movement against Israel. But of course, now what's happening with anti-Semitism, it's becoming mainstream. So we all have to be concerned and we all have to fight it in every way we can. And what's really disheartening is that we have major political parties, the Democrat Party, that is embracing it. And you do have some, far out elements within the Republican Party, but it's quickly condemned. In the Democrat Party, it's exalted and put forward.
Thank you. Deborah, you have, you're not Jewish, but you've jumped into the world of combating Jewish hate and comprehending it. Are you worried, in a word? And we have to be brief because we've got a lot more questions in very little time. But Deborah, are you worried?
Yes, definitely. And I had felt when I started this project that we should have a decent pro-Jewish Holocaust movie every year to remind people never again. And this is something that I am very passionate about. I probably can't do, those movies every year, but the point is we need people to wake up as to how many people have been persecuted from Israel, all the generations. I felt it when we had the premiere in Jerusalem this last couple of weeks. Just the immense heartache. Everyone in that room was associated with somebody that had been murdered, a family member that had been taken out. And to live, I don't think us Gentiles have any idea what that's like to live with, to have a constant shadow over you of who's going to attack when and how much, and especially in Israel.
Everybody on this panel has a deep connection to someone who was victimized in the Holocaust and or other attacks. Thank you, Deborah. Now, this leads to Yaakov Silber. I forget where you're from, whether it's Pennsylvania or Florida. I know those are different places. And he says, talking about movies, please give us an update about the planned Hollywood blockbuster based on the brilliant book, IBM and the Holocaust. Well, I'm getting, Richard is giggling, I'm getting my annual option renewal. And every year they tell me this is the year. And I can't name any names, but some of the top tier of the top tier of Hollywood are now looking at it. And, it's all got to come together. But if it is scheduled, and we hope it will be done this summer, then Yaakov, you'll be the third to know. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Richard. Did you want to make an option? You have to call William Morris.
Okay, for sure.
All right. So here's a comment that becomes a question from Tamara in Germany. She says the IUD story should also be mentioned about the Inuit girls in Greenland. So basically, Denmark was a follower of the eugenics genocide in the first half of the 20th century and a little bit after that. I've written a book about this war against the weak, and they gave IUDs to sterilize thousands of Inuit girls, many as young as 12. Our own Indian medical bureaus did the same thing, of course. And this was genocide and basically tried to destroy a large segment of this native population, saying that they would have fewer mouths to feed. That sounds like something I heard in Nazi Germany. Here's a question from Chris in Indiana. Many conservative anti-Semites tend to be young influencers with a significant number of young followers. How does this bode for the future of the Republican Party? Jonathan.
It's a significant problem because we have to remember when we speak of how, the situation in colleges and even K to 12 schools where, the progressive project of indoctrinating a generation in these toxic left-wing myths about critical race theory and intersectionality and settler colonialism that smears Israel. That affected right-wing kids as well, kids on the right as well as kids on the left. It is the divide in this country about Israel is to some extent generational. Young people know less about Israel. I mean, young people know less about most things because they don't read. Our education system failed them. They may have gotten some Holocaust education, but most of it was actually misguided because it tried to universalize the issue rather than teaching of anti-Semitism as a political weapon to be used against the Jews to have people getting power. So this is where this horseshoe politics that Alyza brought up about how the far right and the far left meet. And it's sort of the same thing, the same factors that have created these pro-Hamas mobs on college campuses are creating, mobs, virtual mobs on the right of young people who believe in these toxic ideas about Jews as well. And, we need to fight back, and we need to fight them on their own turf. Too much of our, that's why so much of what we do at JNS is, we're making podcasts. We're trying to reach people on social media, on TikTok, where the eyeballs are, where the ears are. And we can't abandon the fight in those fields and speak only to ourselves, because that's a real problem.
All right. Thank you. And by the way, it's jns.org, ladies and gentlemen. Here's Rita in Century City. And she says, since Charlie Kirk's murder, Turning Point USA doesn't call the U.S. a Judeo-Christian nation now, but a Christian nation. Has this organization been hijacked by some anti-Semitism? So, Alyza, what do you got to say?
I mean, some of what this question may be getting at is what Jonathan also referred to and what I was saying, at this shift in the conservative movement away from talking about how both America and Israel share the same Judeo-Christian values. That was a language that was used, but now it is much more shifted to America first and recognizing America as its own independent nation with its own independent issues that needs to be able to make decisions based on that. And so that may be some of, but there's definitely a concern, right? You look at the TPUSA crowd at that conference and you realize that Tucker Carlson and his ilk are making a play to try and get those supporters to come to his part of the conservative movement. And that is very frightening. And I think it is something that the Jewish community needs to be very aware of and we need to address. When there needs to be from leaders in the Republican Party very strong condemnation of the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, fluke. And you've seen it, as you mentioned, from Ted Cruz. Ambassador Mike Huckabee has been very strong in that regard. Ben Shapiro spoke at the TPUSA. In fact, that's when you talk about how J.D. Vance was very disappointing in terms of his response to them. But there needs to be very strong pushback, because you did not see that strong pushback in the Democratic Party, which is one of the reasons why I think the Democratic Party has not been at all successful. In fact, it's been taken over in large measure and almost fully silenced. Right. In other words, it's very, very hard now for anyone to push back. That anti-Zionist community has grown and been mainstreamed. And when you talk about, for instance, Mamdani, the problem with the anti-Semitism, the way it's defined by that portion of the Democratic Party, is as an anti-Semitism that totally excludes what they call any kind of anti-Zionism from being considered anti-Semitism. So in other words, Mamdani would be ready to recognize the anti-Semitism of right-wing Nazis. But if you want him to acknowledge that the Jews are a people, that the Jews have an ancient ancestral connection to the land of Israel, that the Jewish people are indigenous to Judea, and that from that stems the right for Jews to self-determination in our ancestral homeland, that he would not accept either that narrative, and he certainly would not accept that anything that challenges that or that targets Jews who define their Jewishness that way. He would not view that as anti-Semitism. He would claim that that's all a political debate and it has nothing to do with their Jewishness.
All right, we have another follow-up here in Indiana. Vance is also closely linked to Erica Kirktrue, who has continued her deceased husband's support of Israel. Will this influence Vance? And this makes me ask you, Alyza, is Erica still carrying on the support for Israel that people like you and me know that her husband set forth?
So the challenge is that she clearly has people in the Republican Party who she's close to who are pulling her in the wrong direction.
All right, we have
she has already endorsed J.D. Vance,
right,
for president in 2028. So
right. Thank you, Jonathan. Here's a question from the Villages, our watch party. What can be done about Tucker Carlson and his ilk? And I'll answer that. The first thing we need to do is to get some knee braces, and we need to talk about it. And we got to bring it out of the shadows. This show is doing that. Jonathan Tobin has done that in his stunning editorial. Now the National Review has, and we need to let the Republican Party know that our mutual alliance is being threatened by this infection from the right. The Watch Party in Newton, Mass. Doesn't the commentary of people like Carlson and Candace Owens normalize and elevate anti-Semitic speech? Well, the answer is, if you're going to get Nazi Hitler-loving Nick Fuentes and you're going to just give him a platform of a couple of hours to spew his venom, the answer is yes. Jonathan, are the actual neo-Nazis getting their voice in the conversation by people like Tucker and Candace?
yes, well, of course they are. I mean, that's the point. When Megyn Kelly, who is much more of a mainstream, not really an ideologue, but now she's a podcaster, she's back sort of on the right. When she praises Fuentes, and in part it's reflecting the fact that these lunatic voices are the product of a sort of a lost generation of young men who have no values and who are sort of set adrift in our woke culture. But the point is, the answer is we can't be neutral about it, because if you are, then you're saying it's okay. That's the whole point. When you're saying there's nothing wrong with Zohran Mamdani, if you're a Democrat and you say, well, I'm going to endorse him even though I disagree with him, you're normalizing anti-Semitism. You're normalizing anti-Zionism. If you're a conservative or a Republican and you're saying, well, I've got nothing against Tucker, he's one of us, then you are normalizing it, and you are creating a public discourse not only in which, and we've moved the so-called Overton window of what is acceptable discourse to include anti-Semitism. We know that that's happened on the left. We have these situations where when people like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden were confronted with people saying these blood libels about Jews in Israel, they just said, well, that's a voice to be heard. And, I referred to that as, Kamala Harris saying that anti-Semites are very fine people, like they accused Trump falsely of saying about the KKK and the Nazis. Well, that's what happens when you are neutral. You're saying they're very fine people. And now we have people on the right who are essentially doing that. And if that stands, then the right is compromised, just as the left has been.
All right, folks, I'd like to do this for the rest of the hour or two, but we're out of time. So hold for my closing word of wisdom, just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my very knowledgeable and excellent guests, Jan22, Alyza, Lewin, Richard Allen, and Deborah Smersnick. Plus, I want to thank my talented international team, including Wes in the Bay Area, Eve in New Jersey, Holly in Nashville, Martin in Michigan, Carol in Maryland, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks. It's going to be a big show at 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to the edwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, iTunes Books, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 325 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, and my latest, Israel Strikes Iran. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com, click books. Get access to participate in live and future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click the notification button like tens of thousands of others have. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. The other side of a half-truth is actually the half-lie. I'm zooming out from our nation's capital. Bless all of you and pray for all that is unfolding before our very eyes.